Hello, all. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about this book. I went ahead and invited all my circles, so anyone that wants to jump in here is welcome. This book, it's the second of two books I referred to earlier. I did a brief reference to The Legend of the Grail by Emma Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz, and this book is called Goddeses. Goddeses. Joseph Campbell. The book is assembled by Saffron Rossi, edited by Saffron Rossi, PhD. And what she did is she took lectures that Campbell had given over the years and assimilated them into this small book that discusses goddesses. So for those of you who are not familiar with Joseph Campbell, brilliant guy, explored myth, taught at university for most of his life on myth, the meaning of myth, the role of myth in culture, its effects on us at a social level, an unconscious level, the meanings of myths, and it's a fascinating subject. It's kind of it's one of those never-ending, you find just it branches off into so many different things. He interpreted Native American myth, religious myths, legends, Eastern myths, and he found similar principles throughout all these myths that come from all these different cultures. So this book in particular is focusing on goddesses, and it's in a sense related to the previous summary I did, or reference I did, to the Grail legend, which I was suggesting in that talk that the Grail is very much a representation of this patriarchal society trying to find the missing feminine, and that's why this book ties in nicely. So, Goddesses from lectures given by Joseph Campbell. Now, I wanted to read an excerpt from this to you, which is really excellent. This is in the introduction, which is good. So by Saffron Rossi, introduction. And here she makes several fascinating points. You might ask, well, how did we get to be such a patriarchal society? What happened? Because if you go far enough back, there is evidence that there were at least some matriarchal religions or matriarchal spiritual practices. At least they found archaeological objects that are feminine. They look to be deities, feminine deities that played a significant role in society and culture. So at some time there was a more prominent presence of the goddess in culture. And then we had this influx of nomadic hunting culture. So these agrarian, more solidly grounded societies that were agrarian tended to be matriarchal or have more feminine-oriented spiritual practices. Nomadic hunting groups tended to be more patriarchal. And then what happened is these nomadic hunting groups came into these agrarian cultures and took over. And they supplanted the existing matriarchal deities with patriarchal deities. Sometimes they would replace them wholesale and try to destroy everything. Sometimes there'd be this kind of mixture of the two religions as the patriarchal took over. The patriarchal invading culture would assert the power of its deities above the existing deities, but they wouldn't necessarily always throw the old ones out. And sometimes they'd kind of merge them in, and you get these mixtures of religious, spiritual practices. And when you look back through this stuff, it's like a puzzle. You kind of have to figure out what exactly happened. You get strange things like in the Greek tradition, you have Zeus marrying all these different women. Well, that can be a reflection of the Greek culture's deity Zeus co-opting these various matriarchal traditions within various cultures as the Greeks took over. So anyway, the reference I want to share with you here is she's talking about Judaism, and there's a reference that Freud makes about Judaism. And the reason I think this is so key is, we have Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. These three traditions come from the same basic source, and they're all three very patriarchal. So you could say, this is the hinge upon which this very strong patriarchal position within Western culture, that's the hinge of it. That's the source of it, the root of it. So Freud's talking a little bit about this, and here's the excerpt. Freud asks in Moses and Monotheism, his work, Moses and Monotheism, why it was that just when all the other peoples of the Eastern Mediterranean were learning to read their myths poetically, the Jews became more confirmed than ever in the concretistic, Freud calls it religious, way of interpreting their idea of God. The obvious reason, I would say, this is Saffron Rossi, the obvious reason, or no, this is still Freud, the obvious reason I would say is that both they and their tribal deity failed to realize that the waters of the deep, Tehom in Hebrew, over which Elohim was brooding and blowing in the first two verses of Genesis, was not just water, but the old Babylonian goddess of the primeval sea herself, Tiamat, and that his failure, that is Elohim's failure to appreciate the poetry of her presence there, was the beginning of his whole misunderstanding even of himself. It was to her, his cosmological wife, that he should have turned to listen occasionally when moved to throw the book at their disobedient children. So a reference to, the very severe nature of the patriarchal God of the Old Testament, who would so severely punish wayward adherents. But anyway, this idea that if you go and look at Genesis 1, there's this reference to the waters, Elohim blowing over the waters. And what if the waters really are, previously in other myths, that was really an expression of feminine divinity. So there's this shift that occurs in this very early Jewish understanding of God. It becomes a heavily patriarchal approach to God. It totally excludes any notion of the feminine, and you get a masculine deity, and then you get Christianity and Islam taking up that same initiative. It's a strictly masculine deity, so that any consideration of the feminine divine is considered what is it called, heterodox, or it's considered anyway, not worthy of consideration. So what she does in this book, she goes through Campbell's various lectures, and he goes through a variety of cultures and reveals very amazing and thought-provoking principles that evolved in these matriarchal religious traditions, and some of the symbols that came out of these traditions, and how those symbols can perhaps enlighten us about our own spiritual understanding of ourselves. And also, on a practical level, it can kind of shed some light on the historical progression of religion and how religion and spirituality came to be what it is today. So it's a fascinating book. Highly recommend it. It's again pretty deep. It's pretty intense. So it's not a quick read. I've read it, and I'm trying to read it again, and I have to reread a lot of things. It's the kind of thing you could read several times and still you're not going to keep getting new stuff out of it. It's brilliant. So anyway, I hope you enjoy that. And I think for vegans, it's interesting that a lot of these ancient agrarian cultures had feminine goddesses as a primary principle, and that, of course, that makes sense because growing plants, there's a very feminine quality to that. It's as a woman bears a child, the child grows and develops inside the woman and then is born. It's analogous to a seed planted in the earth and then grows into this plant from which we derive food. So I think it's very interesting stuff. Hope you enjoy it. I didn't get a lot of comments on my last reference. I know this is a little bit outside of the general topic that I do on this channel, but I find this stuff fascinating. I hope some of you will be interested. Would love to hear your comments. And thanks very much. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.